Well, summer's almost over, and if you haven't heard, we went to camp, and I'm going to talk about it again, just a little bit. I promise I'm not going to talk about camp all year long, but there's one thing I wanted to share, and frankly, to bounce some things off you that maybe afterwards you can extend some of the thoughts. For those of you who are not aware or maybe have not had the opportunity to a youth camp, it's kind of an unusual situation. It's a complete disruption of your life. Completely new schedule, but one of the benefits is that it's easier to think about life. And I honestly have thought it's one of those situations where you think, how can we bottle this and take it somewhere else? Because it can't just be about where it is. In fact, we were at a new campground, the new old one where it started, and so I'm more and more intrigued because I've been doing this for a long time, and it's almost frustrating because it's almost like it is trapped up there. And I think in some respects I see certain elements on down the hill, as we say. But one reason why it's easier to think about your life when you're at camp is everything's kind of switched around. I was thinking about this recently. You see, in regular life, which we will be experiencing as soon as we say goodbye, we'll go out there and start experiencing what we might think of as regular life. A large percentage of it is about the world. Almost all of it is about the world. I mean, it kind of feels that way. As Christians, of course, we're 100% spiritual, even though we live in the world. But a small percentage of it is about the Word. It's like, if you want to picture it as this giant, monstrous area that's the world, and then there's this little island of thought, maybe a little spot that's, the Word. And I think camp kind of turns that around. The great majority of the time is spent focusing on the things that matter. Even when we're playing silly games, there's some, I guess what you'd call, it feels safe. There's not any animosity that you might feel, in the world. And a large percentage of the efforts there can be traced back to the Word. And whereas it's the world that there's almost like a little spot of that maybe once in a while. And so we end up doing more thinking about important things and kind of a better perspective on your life. I bet you, and of course it's not just camp, about all of us, maybe in the middle of a vacation this summer, maybe just in the middle of a lunch break that was, you got some perspective and that one of those aha moments. And I think this is really vital to everybody because it's very possible to not have those and never really think about your life. You have to be able to keep your heads clear, make sure your mind is right. The world is constantly pushing to make you more worldly. I'm sure you feel that. And the more time you spend in the world, the more you can see where maybe you've allowed that to happen in your life. And there's this pressure to conform. If you look at Romans 12, there's really only one way to resist that, this pressure to conform. And you'll notice hidden in this scripture, the word form shows up inside two words in this passage, Romans 12, starting with verse 1. The only way to resist the pressure to conform is to transform. And it's this battle going on. Romans 12:1 says, "And do not be conformed to this world." It's pushing you to form a certain way. "But be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect." So we go to the Word and we have the Bible to kind of contradict or counteract what the world's trying to do to us. And for many, becoming a Christian, it's mentioned several times, we tend to think of being baptized as if it's the end goal. And it's an incredible moment in anybody's life, but it's being born. That's when things start. Being a Christian means being transformed and renewing our minds. Being a Christian is not just baptism. That's where it starts. But being that means being transformed. And so you think about that term, being renewed in our minds. That means my mind today can't be like my mind was yesterday. And tomorrow I'm going to have a different mind. That's what that literally means. That's kind of interesting to me. So when baptism happens, the search is not over. The Bible tells us that we keep seeking. Colossians 3 touches on this idea. Colossians 3, starting with verse 1. So notice there's this initial positioning, and then there's further expectations. Here it is. "Therefore, if you've been raised up with Christ," so there's the positioning, "keep seeking the things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on the things above, not on the things that are on earth, but for you have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. So we keep seeking things above, the things above, and set your minds on the things above. And of course, we all know, if I only do that on Sunday, not much is going to happen. I'll be at best spinning my wheels. So it means searching in the Word and then locking your thoughts on the truth. That's what I think of as setting my mind. I'm going to look at the Bible. I'm going to read something. I've got to go a little farther than just that. I mean, daily Bible reading is a great start. But if I'm just reading it, the next step is to set my mind to lock onto that and change my mind somehow. Something's got to be different than it was before. We're seeking and setting our minds. And this clarity is essential to our survival. You live in the world, but you maintain your brain with the Word. And without that, there's a decline. You can lose the ability to think clearly. Romans 8, Joe just read this for us, talks about where you kind of lose your connection. So with all this that we've been talking about, read this again with me, Romans 8, starting with verse 5. So notice there's this idea of how is my mind directed? For those who are according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh. That's what they lock on. But those who are according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. Now notice this, it's easy to mistake what this is saying. For the mindset on the flesh is death. And you might think that the next part is, but the mindset on the Spirit is life, the end. But notice it's life and peace. You get that bonus. So you don't just live, you have peace. And then look at verse 7. Because the mindset on the flesh, and this is pretty scary when you take it to heart, the mindset on the flesh is hostile toward God. For it does not subject itself to the law of God, for it is not even able to do so. And those who are in the flesh cannot please God. We have to set our minds very deliberately, because if I'm set on the flesh, it's death. If I'm set on the Spirit, it's life and peace. If I set my mind on the flesh, I will become hostile toward God. I don't think that means that I'll necessarily be outwardly opposed and say I defy everything that has to do with Christianity. No, it's not that simple. It's just a progressive moving away from Him and living in such a way that opposes everything that He wants for you. And losing your ability to be changed by the Word. Losing your ability to have a new mind tomorrow. That scares me to think that I might be done. This is it. I'm just kind of locked in. I'm not going to get any better in any way. And that's what the world has waiting for you, but really, in essence, it will decline from there. It's crucial that we keep our clarity by setting our minds to the Word. So going to camp helps, but you can't wait until you get to a campground. I'm not heading there anytime soon. I bet nobody else is. Like any time in the near future. So the location is not more spiritual. I appreciate the mountains and the rivers, and I think there's something to be said to be able to see the stars and say, oh yeah, God made that. There's something to be said for setting, but that's not what it's all about. It's not about location. It can help you get rid of distractions, but everything we did there, you could do anywhere. There's nothing that I can think of that you couldn't do anywhere, except a flower war probably would be out of place in some places. But you get the idea. Everything is translatable to everyday life. Here's one thing. This is what I wanted to talk about. There was one thing that was kind of unusual, and it's been kind of stuck in my mind about this location, and I bet it's true at Yellowstone Bible Camp as well as other places. There's no Wi-Fi. One of the first things you'll notice when you get to the campground is you are off the grid. I'm already mourning the day when that will no longer be a problem. Will be the older people saying, I remember when there were places you couldn't get any reception at all. And they'll be like, really? Wow, the dark ages. And I think it's coming. I think it's coming. There will be no place where you can not be connected. So when you get to the campground, one of the first things you have to adjust to is your cell phone is just a camera now. That's all it is. And it stops being a phone. A few miles down the road, there's a stop sign. There's a fork in the road. They should put a sign there and say, abandon all ye hope in your cell phones, and continue on. But we would have to drive down there to get a signal. But this campground was disconnected. No reception at all. Except there was one exception. One small area, this little pocket area, where the caretakers lived, there was a hotspot there. And if you knew the password, you could go stand there and get texts and emails. Don't tell anybody this at camp. Okay. Probably already knew because it was kind of weird. We got some pulses of signals once in a while, and people get random texts. It was kind of strange. But there was this tiny island where if you stood in the right place and knew the password, you could connect again and get back on the grid. It's almost like this little spot belonged to the world. I thought that's kind of the opposite of what the world is. Everything else is the world, and then one little spot belongs to God. Here it was the other way around. Most of it was about the Word, and then there was this little island where you could kind of let the world slip in if you needed to. And it was complicated because we didn't want everybody to know, otherwise there'd be a herd of people there texting and Facebook catching Pokemon and all that stuff, standing around there. But here's where it got complicated. We wanted to hear about Adelaide. We were waiting for Adelaide's arrival, and we were off the grid. So we found out about this little spot. And so I would try to be discreet. And so I'd be walking from one end of the campground to the other, and I'd turn my phone, set it ready, get it off airplane mode, and I would just discreetly walk by the spot. And my phone would, vibrate, and I'd know, okay, message received. Okay, and then I'd have to discreetly go look and see and get a message and check for any news. And that's how we found out that Adelaide had arrived safely. And there are some good things about this hot spot. But I found it interesting that everywhere it was very word friendly, except for this one spot. It was kind of a way to slip back into the world. I could have easily, in fact, I did. I checked some emails, and there were some more business connected things and things like that. And I wasn't able to do that before with camp, and it was almost like the world was kind of peeking in. Back home, it's completely the other way around. Everywhere is world friendly, except I guess you could say for certain spots, but it's not geography, of course. It's not like you can go to a spot and your prayers are better because you happen to be in a church building or anything like that. It's nothing special about locations. But back home, it's about time. Finding time to focus on the Word. That's like finding that hot spot at the campground, saying, oh, good, I found something here. You have to do that with time when you're in regular life. And just as it took effort there to slip back into the world, it takes effort here to slip back into the Word, especially tomorrow, because I know everybody has stuff to do tomorrow. You have to take time and focus. I want to point out, I could find there's at least three accounts of Jesus doing something like this. If you look at Mark 1, I want to possibly draw a conclusion here that I'm not sure I'm going to want to hear, and I bet you I won't be the only one. Mark 1:35. So these are examples of Jesus kind of carving out some time, and he was busy. I don't think any of our schedules could compare with his. Mark 1:35, in the early morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went away to a secluded place and was praying there. You probably read that before. Kind of easy to just kind of fly right by it. So he removed himself from the commotion, and he took time to pray. Here's Luke 5:15. Luke 5, verse 15. So notice there's like a lot of stuff going on. But the news about him was spreading even farther, and large crowds were gathering to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus himself would often slip away to the wilderness and pray. Notice that he had to slip away. When you slip away, I don't think you say, hey, I'm going to go over here if anybody needs me. I'll be at 303, if you contact information. It's like slipping away means they're looking that way and you're going out the back door to get away. It's hard to arrange for time. It took effort. Here's Mark 6. Mark 6. And this time, he's not going to be alone, but it's kind of a similar idea. Mark 6, verse 30. The apostles gathered together with Jesus, and they reported to him. So it's this kind of a business meeting, so to speak. They reported to him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, come away by yourselves to a secluded place and rest a while. For there were many people coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. They went away in the boat to a secluded place by themselves. So I think seclusion is key. If you want this time where where you can kind of clear your head, you're going to have to slip away and find some seclusion. And that's pretty hard where we live. You need to be there for other people. I get that. But the person that you need to be for those other people, you'll be a better person for it if you get away from them sometimes. So seclusion and quiet and alone time, these are all significant. At camp, I had to go out of my way to kind of connect with the world. And in the world, I have to go out of my way to connect to camp, I guess, for lack of a better word. But you get what I'm saying. So I've got to figure out tomorrow what I'm going to do. I've been working at it, and I bet you have done the same. I'm going to try and find a spot, some time. Middle of the day, probably not going to happen. I don't know. Maybe it's the momentum. Maybe it's just where the day's got a good grip on you. And it's so hard to just shut down everything and slip away and find seclusion in the middle of the day. I know at least in one case that I mentioned, Jesus slipped away in the early morning. And here's the bad news. Morning makes sense. I'm going to tell you why. And I don't want to hear this as much as you do. And it's not a direct command or anything like that, but it's something to consider. This is for your consideration. What we're talking about is a form of waking up. That's really what we're talking about. Waking up physically is a lot like waking up spiritually. It takes effort. It's easier to stay in bed, just to stay who you are. I think that's what we do spiritually sometimes. Snooze button, I'll get back to that later. And we keep saying, yeah, I need to work on that. Yeah, I need to work on that. And but it's also true that the more you do it, the better you get. I know maybe everybody's here has had an early morning job, and that first morning's horrible. You just rather do just about anything than get up. But then it gets easier. God has often used the image of waking up to describe salvation. One of them is in Isaiah 52. In fact, a couple of them are in Isaiah. Isaiah 52, starting with verse 1. Notice there's this idea of salvation is kind of like, okay, you were asleep. It's time to get up. Awake, awake, clothe yourself in your strength, O Zion. Clothe yourself in your beautiful garments, O Jerusalem, the holy city. For the uncircumcised and the unclean will no longer come into you. Shake yourself from the dust. Rise up, O captive Jerusalem. Loose yourself from the chains around your neck, O captive daughter of Zion. So wake up, get dressed, take off the chains. Isaiah 60. Similar idea in Isaiah 60, verse 1. Arise, shine. For your light, that's, by the way, that's where we get rise and shine from that passage. It's not just an old saying. It comes from this. Rise and shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For behold, darkness will cover the earth, and deep darkness the peoples. But the Lord will rise upon you, and his glory will appear upon you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. Sounds a lot like morning to me. The world is dark, and it's time to rise and provide some light. I think I'm going to make a side note here. I think there's some indications in the description of the temple where they maintain the lamp at the temple. Something to be said for spending time in your Bible in the morning and at night. But I got to thinking about this and these verses and what Jesus did. It doesn't really make sense for me to have this pep talk just before I go to bed. On your mark, get set, good night. It didn't really seem in keeping with that. I don't want to suggest that the only time you can read your Bible or have clarity or find some time is in the morning, but this has kind of snagged in my mind. Romans 13:11. Again, there's this waking up concept. Romans 13:11. Do this, knowing the time that it is already the hour for you to awaken from sleep. And of course, it's talking figuratively, but how appropriate would it be to be also literally? For now salvation is nearer to us than we believed. The night is almost gone, and the day is near. Therefore, let us lay aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. We've got to find a way to wake up. Something appropriate about There's something, appropriate about a Christian getting up and spending time with God. And again, I'm not saying it's not the only time you can do it, but I think I'd be missing out if I did nothing before I set out on my day. If I didn't have time to pray or to read my Bible or to take 5 seconds to acknowledge that he's in charge, I think that'd be a mistake on my part. It's almost like you have to wake up, follow it immediately by waking up. If you're not careful, I bet you've done this. I do it often. You can sleepwalk through your day. And what scares me is I think it's possible to sleepwalk through your life. I like this. Someone once put it this way. Almost the whole world's asleep. Everybody you know, everybody you see, everybody you talk to, only a few people are awake. And they live in a state of constant, total amazement. I think that's a good description of a Christian. If we went home tonight and the Wi-Fi was out, most of us would curl up in the corner and we can't live without it. But the same should be true of the Word. We would do anything, just about anything. We'd make phone calls, whatever. We'd suffer through one night maybe, but we'd make sure that Wi-Fi was up. Kind of important in a sense to find a signal to connect to the world about, finding a certain spot. But you need to find a signal to connect with the Word by finding a certain time. I've said it straightforward many times. I'm not a morning person, but everything I find indicates time in the morning might be one of the best times to set your mind. And like I say, even if it's a matter of 60 seconds, it just makes sense to set your mind to the Word. And more power to you if you do it again at night. And like I say, this is not anything that I could hold anybody accountable, maybe even not me, but there's something to be said about taking time in the morning. There's some exciting possibilities for any of us. I wonder what would happen tomorrow if we got serious. Maybe you already are. If we got serious about starting out the day with our minds set and get more serious about spending time with God. If you're not a Christian, tonight, of course, we want to make sure that you don't face one more day without God. Don't face one more second. So we're going to be singing a song, and that'd be an opportunity to come forward and be baptized. And that is more than an opportunity for you now. If you're like most Christians, we are baptized, and then not much happens after that. That can end up being the situation. I want to encourage all of us to get up tomorrow morning, determined to take the time. Don't let another day slip by filled with things that ultimately do not matter. The only way to not conform to the world is to transform and to set your mind. And I'm convinced if we do that tomorrow's going to be a lot better than you expect. Pray you'll think about this while we stand together and sing.